to Quilters Rule the World. I am Terry Lucas, one of your hosts for this delightful podcast. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you. This week, Michelle and Lori and I continue talking about batting, and I love the direction that it goes in, and I hope that you do too. Enjoy.
I'm mostly a non-washer,
Okay. Um,
but
the
it's mainly because I don't know how to use starch. So that's like 100% of the reason why I don't pre-wash, because I am still learning about what that process will be for me.
right. And I think Tracy and I kind of solved it, or in fact, Lori may have been in on this. That magic spray, wash your fabrics, use a magic spray. You're golden. Like seriously, brilliant stuff. Um,
Um, I wrote down something, but I just want to make sure we talk about it because you said apparel, like you mentioned my background in apparel, and Lori, I know you sew a lot of clothes too.
yeah.
And batting for clothing is very different than batting for quilting. And I
Yes.
think one of the main things I've noticed, and Lori, maybe you have too, is that for clothing, you have something on it that's called a scrim. And that keeps the batting from what in the apparel world we would call bearding. So get having the fibers migrate towards the front. And like if you have a dark fabric, for example, and you would see like all these little fibers. Um, and yeah, there's different kinds of ways that you did very different things in apparel. Like you might use channels and fill them with batting, and um, I don't know, Lori, what have you noticed kind of as like the major differences?
Okay, I'll make you laugh here because the first time I did a garment that I used batting on, I used Warm and Natural. It's my favorite batting. It was awful because it didn't drape. So it made me look like I'd gained 20 or 30 pounds, and it just fit like football shoulder pads. It was terrible. Um, I've used lighter weight batting more successfully, but one of my favorites, I just simply didn't use any batting. I just quilted it. The
Oh,
lining, the outer shell, quilted it.
so
And
not
I
even
like,
like flannel, not even like flannel in the middle.
no, didn't even have flannel. Not, but I think that would work. Now, this is funny because I'd want to use a not expensive flannel and pre-wash it. Because if I used a good flannel, it would probably be too bulky.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm. I double dog dare you to go get the good flannel and try something. I think it would surprise you and delight you.
I'm
Terry,
writing myself a
what's
note.
the what's the good flannel? Let's
Um,
as well plug your favorite.
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
Maywood.
Ah,
yes, it is. It's
It
Maywood.
is.
Of course it's Maywood.
I wasn't
It
fishing for that or
feels
anything.
wonderful.
You know what? Maywood flannel does feel wonderful. Um, and there are a number of other companies who do a good flannel, and I would say it's one like it- uh I'll say this, it's not the stuff that you purchase in a big box store, and
That's
it's
right.
not super cheap, right? Um, if unless you're getting like an amazing sale on something, I would expect to pay somewhere between $8 and $10 a yard right now for the better flannels. And I am the longer I have quilted, the more I am of the buy good materials for right out of the gate. I understand quilters who say, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend so much cash outright because I don't know if I'm going to like this. What is happening is we're often setting ourselves up to not like something because that's when things go haywire, when we're not using the good stuff.
Yep.
Even when I'm practicing machine quilting, which I still do, I practice on the good stuff because I need to know, like, there is a difference between how the good fabric and the good quality fabric and then the low quality fabric take machine quilting. If I make an extra practice block or a practice, if I'm making a whole cloth quilt and I've got something to practice on because I just need to make sure, check the tension before I get going on something, I'm using whatever materials that I'm using in the quilt itself. So same thread, same batting, same, top and back. Because then I'm going to be able to, even if that's 2 layers of batting, because then I know I'm going to be able to get the tension set correct. And when I am machine quilting, the tension setting is like it's key to everything that I do.
I have to take my earrings off. They're hurting
Okay,
me.
and so the tiara is coming off.
Um, you made me think of something when you were talking about getting the good fabric or the good quality flannel. And if there is kind of the same thing in batting and also like the Franken batting thing, like taking scraps of batting and putting that together. I think that's, I'd love to hear what you guys think about quality batting versus maybe something that you just get, maybe at a thrift shop, that's a bag of batting scraps and you, what I like to call Franken batting it together. Um, yeah.
Lori, have you done the Franken batting thing?
I do it all the time, but I do it with my batting scraps. So I know that it's all the same stuff. There's not any cheap batting and good batting. It's all warm and natural.
And you could probably get that, like, if I could probably ask my long arm quilter to send me the extra batting. I didn't even think of that till just now.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Oh,
probably
absolutely. You can.
like if you do charity quilts and stuff, maybe you have a local long arm quilter that could donate those batting scraps and you could, Lori, how do you do the Franken batting? Do you use the batting tape or
No, no, I square it up so the edges are nice and straight, and then I just butt them together and zigzag.
do you do that, Tracy? Tracy, Terry. Hi, Tracy, we miss you. Sorry, Terry.
Um, it depends. Um, when I had the Moxie here and I needed to join batting, I would do it right on the long arm and I would do a serpentine curve and just take out the extra, because you layer it over, you do a serpentine curve, you take the 2 extra pieces out, essentially the offcuts out, make sure it's batted up together, put the quilt over, and off you go. On my home sewing machine, if I'm joining batting up, um, I'm usually doing it on a small enough quilt where I can feel if the batting's not quite together and then just reach underneath and nudge it over to where it needs to be. Um, if I have never used the batting tape, although I have sold a lot of it because a lot of quilters are like, I just need that extra support. Great, go for it. Here you go. Here's what you do. And always make sure you're using a medium warm iron. Don't get it too hot because if you overheat that glue, the adhesive, it will turn to plastic. Um, and then on my show quilts, because they're so small, usually I have batting that's the appropriate size. So on those, I tend not to do that kind of thing because I need to be attentive to like if something starts spreading. So that's always whole batting. That's always whole batting.
I have a hot topic for batting,
Oh, go ahead.
spray based.
Absolutely.
For
Absolutely.
both sides or one side? On the
Both.
batting or on the batting?
Um, I I have seen quilters do it both ways. I prefer it on the batting itself, only because I can if the my concern is always if the fabric gets damp, then it can kind of squeeze, it'll kind of come together. Like the
Yes.
fiber does its thing. The fiber will expand and then it won't contract back because there's an adhesive on it. So I spray the batting, but I see a lot of quilters, like nationally ranked kind of quilters, who do it up on their design wall and they spray their fabric and they're not having any problems with it. So it's kind of try them both and see what works better for you.
And Lori, what about you?
I do spray based. Um, I've gotten in trouble. My little warning here is if you use too much spray, then you'll start having trouble with skip stitches and thread breaking and all sorts of stuff. And it's just because you've got wild with the spray based and you've got too much. But if you spray lightly, it's a great way to work with little quilts, especially.
And I actually taught one of my students this week how to spray based, and she was amazed because, our when we have a sprayer, we tend to go, psh. You don't want to do that.
That's right.
And she was holding it maybe 6 inches away from the quilt, and I'm like, no, you want to be like 12 to 15. So you're gonna hold it up a little bit higher and go psh, 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 because part of what's happening is that and the spray spreads out a little bit further. And so you can it'll adhere. You'll cover the area faster. It won't take as much time. And then you can pat everything down and make sure it's all good before you get started stitching. And then you're not worrying about overspray. You're not worrying about gumming up your needles or bounced and skipped stitches.
Okay, just to make sure, I'm going to recap this. So
Okay.
I've spray basted on small quilts or runners, but
Hmm.
if I were going to do a full size quilt or anything, I would lay out my backing, but I would have already sprayed one side of my batting.
No. Okay, so when I do this, I lay my backing out. I make sure however I'm doing it, I make sure I kind of pin it or I will clip it to something so that it's tight, but it's not super taut. Like I don't want to overstretch it. Then I'll lay my batting over it, and then I'll lay the quilt top on. And then I do this about half to 2/3 thing. So I'll fold the quilt top and the batting back by about half to 2/3. I'll spray the batting. I'll get it sorted out on the backing. I'll spray the batting again, and then I'll put the top down and then make sure this is another place to make sure where it's square, but I'll get that all situated and then I'll repeat that on the other side.
So I feel like you've just shared one of your quilt sandwich recipes with us.
I did actually. I did. And I will tell you this. I'll tell you this too. If I'm working on a quilt that's like 30 by 30 or smaller and I'm using cotton batting, as long as I have like kind of pressed everything together kind of firmly, not smooshing it out. On a quilt that is that small, I don't baste at all. So there's no spray base, there's no pin base. I just go for it.
I think I have no words. I've never considered doing that ever. Like no basting, not even like a diagonal wow, not even a couple pins. You are brave
Or stupid.
or
Now, see,
skilled.
I was thinking I do that too, and it's because I just kind of am lazy sometimes.
Again, like
It
if
takes too many steps if you have to do all this pinning or spray basting and on the little ones, it stays pretty smooth, or you can feel it if it doesn't.
right, and that's the thing, you can like because because I work on a stationary machine, I work on a home sewing machine, I can feel, through the batting if something's a little bit off. And so I will just kind of pick it up and smooth it out,
Yep.
just gently, kind of nudge it along, and I'm good. But again, part of this is knowing your audience. Now, if my 30 by 30 quilt was for Houston, it's a whole different story.
Right, right.
So, but yeah, and something that's relatively small, and like I have dimensions where I will not go beyond. So once I get beyond that, even if it's 31 inches by 31 inches, that's when I literally start basting there.
Wow.
Okay, so one more question for everybody. When when you're using batting for a domestic machine versus a long arm, you are always adding extra. So you've got your backing and then your batting's going to be a little bit wider than your top. Do you have any advice or favorite amounts that you add to your batting? Like 2 inches all around or 4 inches, and why?
It would depend on how big the quilt is. If
Oh,
it's something little, then a couple inches is probably enough.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm working on a big quilt, then I want 4 inches all the way around.
Yeah, essentially there are a couple of things that you need at that point. One is a little bit of room for the quilt to grow. Now, uh, I'm not one that if I'm quilting, because I tend to quilt so densely, I'm not one who has a problem with the quilt growing. I know you both are shocked by this. Um,
All right.
Um, but once I get towards the edges, like, depending on how I'm moving, but once I get towards the edges, that 4 to 6 inches actually just gives me something to hold on to as I'm working on the edge of the quilt. And that is just as important at a process on a stationary as it is on a long arm. Now, on a long arm, you need that extra fabric and batting all the way around because of how everything is sandwiched on there. The long armor, like the long armor will have clips or something that's holding tension on the width of your quilt so that the tension on there is right. So the quilt isn't just kind of flopping all over the place on you. So that is why your long armors need that extra area around the edge. And they usually want what, 6 inches? 6 to 8 inches, depending on the quilt.
yeah.
A total of 8 inches would be what I would call the minimum.
Right,
And that's 4 inches on each side.
right. And I'm thinking more like 6 inches on each side. Again, it would almost depend on the size of the quilt.
Yes.
Almost depend on the size of the quilt, but it's also what you have. So I know when I had the long arm here, I loved that extra space, partly because it gave me a visual as I'm moving from here to there, because I get distracted while I'm quilting. It gave me the visual to know where the quilt ends.
Makes sense. And also something to hold on to. I think that's a really good point. Well, it's been about an hour.
I was only expecting this to be like 30 minutes.
There's so much to talk about with batting.
Yes.
Any last thoughts about batting or bats or
We haven't mentioned one batting that I ran into at a farmer's market in the Denver metro area, and that was a llama bat. It was brown, so you'd have to use it on a dark quilt. But I just thought, oh, I'd really like to play with that just to see.
did you get some?
I didn't. It was really pricey.
Like how pricey?
I don't remember that anymore,
Okay.
but it was pricey enough that I wasn't willing to gamble on it.
Sounds wonderful. I wonder if it's made in a similar way they would make roving,
Mm.
Could
Oh, could
be.
be.
because that
Could-
would be dense and yeah, a lot of fiber.
and my final tip is get a crib size batting and just play. So it get a crib size batting, share it with your friends or make placemats or something to give you a feel for how the batting works for you. A crib size is a great way to try things. And when you're looking at the economy of it, it's actually probably a little bit more expensive per yard, but the information that you get from using it with your needles, your thread, your sewing machine, and how the stitching looks like, is this what you want your stitching to look like? You can get that in a crib size quilt fairly easily.
I know I just said we're probably going to wrap up, but I have two more hot topics that maybe we just pencil in for another time to talk about batting. One is batting color. Lori, you just talked about the llama batting being brown, and I think it's worth um, investigating and thinking and talking about. And then also how densely you quilt batting, because I think different battings, what is that called when they spread? There's a word for that. I think there is. If
There,
not,
there is, and yeah.
but kind of maybe exploring that also, because I think in the manufacturer's instruction, it's often suggested like, 4 inches or, whatever that space is. And I think that would make a big difference when you're selecting a batting for what your piecing is or quilting style that you plan to use would be. So,
And when we talk about that, ask me about 49 pieces of chocolate.
okay, I'm writing it down. 49 pieces of chocolate. Um, well, I'm going to leave you with this because I made a quilt. It, it it's a memory quilt. It was for my sisters in honor of my dad. And on the back, I used fabric that had bananas on it, and I've let them know that there's always money in the banana quilt. So if you're a Arrested Development fan, that will mean something to you.
Okay.
Always money in the banana quilt. And
Thank you for joining us today on Quilters Rule the World. I am Terry Lucas,
And I'm Lori Baker.
I'm Michelle Friedman.
and
Stitch
we'll
well.
see you. Oh, I love that, Michelle. And we'll see you next time on Quilters Rule the World.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.